the room today we have Cherie Limbrick, who will take up her position next week as the inaugural CEO of Catholic Professional Standards. She's in limbo this week. She finished last week as the Deputy CEO of Catholic Care in Melbourne. So we are absolutely delighted that a Melbourne girl is taking up this new position at Catholic Professional Standards. Just stand up for a minute in case, make sure everyone knows. So now I would like to welcome Patricia Faulkner to speak. Patricia is one of the directors of Catholic Professional Standards. Patricia joins us today to speak about the new organisation that's been set up as a company established by the Catholic Church to develop, audit and report on compliance with professional standards to protect children and vulnerable people. Patricia has had significant involvement with Catholic Social Services Victoria, and among other things is the chair of the board of Jesuit Social Services. Patricia is a former secretary of the Department of Human Services in Victoria, and her portfolio includes child protection as well as Victorian government-funded health and human service systems such as public hospitals, public housing, juvenile justice and disability and accommodation services. For 25 years, Patricia has led large, complex organisations and held a variety of chair and director roles on government entities and not-for-profit boards in diverse sectors. So welcome this morning, Patricia, and we would like you to speak on what organisations need to know about the work to be undertaken by Catholic Professional Standards. Thank you.
Well, good morning, and thank you everyone for getting up in this very cold day and finding your way in here to listen to this discussion about Catholic Professional Standards. Normally our chair would be here. He's overseas at the moment, as I've noticed many of my colleagues of my age are, getting some warmth elsewhere. But I'll start off joining the acknowledgement of the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the people of the Kulin Nations. I acknowledge they have occupied and cared for this land over countless generations, and I celebrate their continuing contribution to the life of this region. As you're aware, Catholic Professional Standards is a very new body. It was established by the Catholic Bishops' Conference and the Catholic Religious Australia in November 2016. And since then, we've been trying to get fully established, but I'm going to tell a bit of that story. So we've been established as part, and may I say part, of the response of the Catholic Church to the now widely acknowledged abuse of children and the cover-up of that abuse in Catholic institutions. We've been established to ensure that all persons and those that engage with the Church in any capacity into the future are treated with reverence and respect. Our focus is on children and vulnerable people, and ensuring, and this is the important part, that church authorities are publicly accountable for their actions. At this point in time, I mentioned we have an acting chairman, Jeff Giudice, who was the president of the Australian Industrial Relations Commission for a number of years, and the inaugural president of the Fair Work Australia, now the Fair Work Commission, from 2009 to 2012. So he has a judicial background, and he is the acting chairman. As well as that, there are two more publicly announced members, myself and the Honourable John Watkins, who was a member of the New South Wales Parliament, and he was the Deputy Premier as well, and he had portfolios in education, police, transport. And I still hear this joke about him that when he actually retired, instead of people talking about rats deserting a sinking ship, they talked about the sinking ship leaving the rats, basically. So he has a very strong reputation for integrity and good work. There are two more members that have been appointed to the board, and I'm going to take a risk because apparently the acting chairman's announced them before the official announcement, and I think the news is out, but I'd appreciate it if you didn't go announcing beyond this room at the moment. So one of them is in fact Robin Miller, Dr. Robin Miller, who's very well known to this group as well. She's a renowned expert in the area of child abuse and child protection and has wide experience as a clinician and in policy development and stand-in setting. She's currently, as people know, the CEO of MacKillop Family Services, and we're very happy to have someone of her expertise joining us. The other one is Michael Lavarch, who some of you will remember, a former Commonwealth Attorney General and Cabinet Minister. He's also been the Dean of Law at the University of Queensland, and he's also he's currently got a portfolio of different responsibilities, including one with the Australian Skills and Quality Authority, where he's very responsible for the standard setting process and auditing compliance. Now, those two people are meant to take up their appointments on August the 1st. There was always flexibility to have more or less directors. At the moment, we're stopping at 5 and seeing how we go, and then seeing, it was certainly envisaged that it could be up to 9 directors, but at the moment the organisation is small and a start-up, and we don't want to have more directors than staff, really. The ongoing chair of the organisation will be elected when we finalise the selection of new directors. So the Constitution provides that we don't appoint the chair, that he's or she is elected by the new directors. We've been assisted to date in the establishment of the organisation with a person called Richard Cameron, who's a consultant. And as has been announced, Cherie Limbrick has been appointed as the inaugural CEO, and she'll commence her role on the 17th of July next week. And I think you've just had an introduction. We took a long time to find a CEO. We probably started looking in the wrong places, and then we realised that the obvious place to find a CEO is a Catholic social service organisation. And I think your primary sort of knowledge and capacity in this area could be extraordinarily helpful to the Catholic Church into the future. So again, I'm aware as the chair of an organisation that runs Catholic social services that we were well ahead of the game in looking at how you protected children and how you dealt with children who had been abused, well ahead of many Catholic organisations, and possibly not listened to for a long time. So I think you have a very key role in this whole process of standard setting and how we audit against standards, and hence the, I suppose, the source of our CEO. Catholic Professional Standards is in fact a not-for-profit company limited by guarantee. Its initial funding comes from its members, Catholic Religious Australia and the Australian Bishops' Conference. There is a provision in the future for new organisations to join us, so it's only got 2 members at the moment, and I'm aware that the newly formed Association of PJPs is discerning whether they should become members of this organisation in the future. At this point in time, all necessary legal and other steps have been taken to operationalise this organisation. So whilst we've been searching for a CEO and a couple of extra directors, we've also been working quite hard on making sure that when Cherie sort of turns the lights on next week, then in fact there's a lot in place that will make the organisation work. Certainly the board's been meeting formally and informally on a number of times to consider many things such as the budget, organisational matters, the recruitment of the CEO and the appointment of new directors, and we've been interviewing candidates along the way. We've also met with a number of other bodies. The leaders of the National Committee of Professional Standards, we've met with them and the staff. We've also met with Catholic Social Services Australia, the National Catholic Education Commission, the Australian Catholic University, and the Institute of Child Protection Standards. And have I missed anyone? I don't think so. The primary purpose of these meetings was to think about how we go about the process of setting standards. Now, it's intended that standards are national, it's intended that the standards cover all parts of the Catholic Church or ministries of the Catholic Church, and so it is a very challenging thing to think about how we land on a set of standards. So the nature of the role that we're intended to play will be in protecting children and vulnerable people by the establishment of professional standards. And it will also involve education about these standards and then auditing compliance of church organisations with the standards. So you can see that the standards are at the centre of all of this. We also have the power to report publicly where we find non-compliance with standards. This is the mechanism that is designed to promote accountability of church leaders to the communities they serve. So it is a role that can be very useful, and in fact, if a church organisation refuses to cooperate with us in some fashion, we do have the power to publish that information. We don't start with a blank sheet in establishing standards. There's already a set of standards that's been developed by the current National Committee for Professional Standards. In addition, many of your organisations have already established their own standards, and there are state and territories that have done various things to either suggest, mandate or set up codes of practice. And we'll look at all of those. The one critique that's emerged so far of all the efforts of everybody to establish standards is the absence of the voice of the child. So that you will see that a lot of people are doing research on this matter, but essentially the standards have been set by adults who think they know how to protect children. And if you take the time to talk to any of the children in your life, and if you can talk to them about something like this, they will say to you that somehow what they really want is to understand who they can go to. And that's not necessarily in everybody's standards. It's not thought through. I certainly questioned my own 8-year-old granddaughter recently, that if something bad happened in her life, who she'd go to. And she just said, Mummy, of course. But then I asked her further about if Mummy wasn't, a good friend or something like that. And it's quite an instructive conversation that people should have. So a lot of the research that's been done suggests that adults are interested in working with children checks, locks on windows, locks on doors. That's not what children say makes them feel safe. So if there's a gap at the moment that we're looking at, that's the gap, that it isn't there. So there's the existing standards, there's a process of, I suppose, compilation of those, looking at them, seeing what they say, seeing what's consistent, but there's also that need to fill a gap. And again, you are the people who can help us with that. Our first task, as I said, is the development of standards, and we have agreed that we won't start all standards all at once. We're going to focus on safeguarding children initially, and it would be unwise not to start there. And we don't intend till every standard is developed before we commence auditing. Our plans about the nature of audits is not set yet, and we're open to advice, but we are considering the possibility of looking at compliance with a very small number of standards across a group of organisations, or compliance with a wide group of standards across a single organisation. For example, we might look at whether there is sufficient safeguarding children's training given to seminarians. We might just look at that across all the people who are educating the clergy, or we might then say, well, no, we're going to look at parishes and have a look at whether in fact parishes have a consistent set of processes to look after the children that come to them. So everything's fairly flexible at the moment, and that's why these discussions I find very useful. I'm aware that a lot of you do have you already have professional standards, and it would be useful to us if your organisations could get together and work out what the key amongst those are. So I've heard from a lot of people who say, we've got great standards and we're happy to hand them over to you. That would be helpful, but what would be more helpful is not to stick to your actual set of standards and say, look, this is the best set of standards and theirs are no good, or you've got to have this or that. We're looking to get to a core set of things. We don't want to make a big administrative burden. We want to get down to what are the core things that a child needs to be protected in an organisation. And a lot of the standards are very good, but they're very complex, they're very hard to follow. If you've got good ones, by all means give them to us, but by all means also organise some workshops with your colleagues, even within a ministry like the one that I'm part of at St Vincent's. There are schools and there are hospitals. It may be that we have to have different ones, but it may be that in the end you might just need 2 or 3 things that ensure that children are protected. We also are looking at, so again, I mentioned earlier that I think that we met with the Australian Catholic University We're also interested in the academic knowledge of what makes a good standard. You know, people are setting standards constantly. They all think they're good ideas, but there are some characteristics that people know make for good standards. So we want a standard that's clearly understood and provides some guidance to people about how you comply with it. We also want to know that we can actually report on standards. And the last thing we want to know is that the standard actually assists in preventing abuse of children. And I mention this because, as many of you will know, I'm a very long-standing public servant, and I've seen many examples of policy development where it looks as if we're doing something about a problem, but in fact it can have, the standard that you set has a very perverse effect. And I still say that mandatory reporting of suspected child abuse is one of those areas that we all think that it protects children. As the person that ran that service for many years, it ended up using most of our resources on triaging rather than supporting the family. So again, you're the people in this room can bring forward examples of where standards have been developed and all they've done is create a compliance burden without any great benefit to the people we seek to protect, or they create an unintended resource allocation issue. So again, for me, the jury's still out. You know, we've all got working with children checks. I still don't know whether it's made a difference. Our process for developing standards will be consultative. It's intended those organisations who will need to comply with the standards will be in the room, as well as those who the standard is intended to protect. I know a number of organisations in the room will be worried about the cost of these audits that we're going to conduct, and I know that funding of social services is very skinny. And I've been asked if we're going to charge you, and we will. We will be charging the organisations. And I think this is justified. We're all very well conditioned to making sure that the handling of the funds that an organisation has at its disposal is audited. How much more important is it to make sure that the people who approach us for assistance are treated with respect and dignity and are not harmed by their interaction? The community has lost confidence in the existing governance structures of the church, and ensuring the safety of those who use our services is core business as far as I'm concerned for all Catholic organisations. So we do need to think about it. That said, we're thinking about how that happens. So there's the possibility, for example, that you don't pay for your own specific audit, because that would be a big expense, that somehow there is a fee paid per annum to support the organisation, and the cost of any audits that are done are socialised across all Catholic organisations. So we're thinking a lot about how we achieve this, and we're trying to make sure that this is a very efficient organisation. Things like, as I've mentioned before, the adoption of a consistent set of standards rather than bespoke standards will lower the costs. So again, we'll be prepared to look at the necessary core. They will be the key to making sure that this organisation doesn't balloon into a big organisation that's largely an organisation that's sending out bills to people and has to have a huge computer system and so on. So I've mentioned earlier 3 things. We're a not-for-profit company, the members of the company and the PJPs are thinking about us. Our day-to-day control, however, and our management and conduct is vested in a board of directors. However, the members of the company have reserve powers under the Constitution, so we don't make all the decisions, and this may become an issue and it may not. So the adoption or amendment of a professional standard is done by the members, the Catholic Bishops and Catholic Religious Association Australia. The approval of our budget is done by the members. Our strategic plan is approved by the members, and taking disciplinary action against a diocese or religious order relating to non-compliance with the standards is done by the members. The company is intended to be functionally independent of the church. The directors at the moment are very confident that CPS will be fully funded, and we have our budget approved without comment for next year, and that the members will act to enlarge the CPS's powers should any deficiencies become evident. To do our job, we intend to enter into contracts with church authorities to ensure that all Catholic entities subject to their authority meet professional standards. With one exception, CPS is not going to handle complaints, so the existing complaint handling processes will either be reviewed or continued. The one exception is that if there is a complaint against a bishop or the leader of a religious organisation, that was done by the National Committee in the past, and it is likely that we may take on that responsibility. The members of our board have been questioned about why do we need to contract with every church authority, and we're looking at ways around that. We might contract with the diocese and they might then collect fees or pay for the rest of the organisations that are under their control. We have to do this because this is a reflection of our existing governance of church entities. This is the way the church operates. It might be cleaner if we didn't have to do that, but at the moment we believe it's possible. And as I said earlier, if someone chooses not to contract with us, we have the ability to mention that quite publicly. So the key messages I'd like to leave with you today is that we're still in the early stages of the establishment of this organisation. The protection of children and vulnerable people who come into the care of organisations of the church is our core business and should be resourced. Third message I'd like to leave with you is that we intend to organise our own work to be as efficient as possible and to do what's required to assist vulnerable people. We wish to be consultative and open in the way we proceed. The current directors intend to use their reputations to support the Catholic Church to do all in their power to ensure that abuse in any form should never occur in the Catholic Church again. We are all very independent people, and if things don't go well, we intend to speak up. And we believe at the moment that the existing work can happen, that the arrangements do allow us to achieve the goals set by the Catholic bishops and the Catholic religious. So that's what I wanted to say. I find I like to answer questions more than I like to speak, so I'm very happy to close there and see whether people have questions for me.
So maybe if you could just have another quick little buzz at your table and come up with a question, and we'll let the tables that didn't get the opportunity to ask a question of Francis to have first go at asking a question of Patricia. So just 5 minutes to come up with some questions and then or comments, and Patricia can respond.